Welcome, my friend, to the On the Blue Line podcast with Wayne Mulder, and I'm your host, Wayne Mulder. This is a law enforcement podcast where we discuss topics that will empower you on and off the job. Maybe you're tired, you're frustrated, you feel overworked, maybe you're struggling to balance your work and home life demands, or maybe you simply need some encouragement. Then you have come to the right place. This is the 154th episode of the podcast, and on today's podcast, you're going to learn what mental toughness is and how to employ it, what it means to be a peaceful savage, and the one thing we can do that will change the world. So if you're just finding us, we have two weekly episodes of the podcast. This one that you're watching is called The Interview Room, and in here we sit down with a different guest from all different walks of life, and we discuss something that hopefully is going to be beneficial for your personal or professional life. And the other podcast is Morning Roll Call, and in there it comes out on Mondays, and you and I just sit down, typically with a cup of coffee, and we discuss the news, recent events, law enforcement trends, and a variety of other topics that hopefully is going to give you something that you can consider for the week ahead. Know that both shows release on video. They're actually made primarily for video and are available on YouTube and Rumble. And of course, they're available in audio everywhere you stream your podcast. And the easy way to see everything that is going on is to go to ontheblueline.com. So let me tell you about this week's guest. Mitchell R. Tucker is who joins me. He has a lot of titles. He is proudly a Christian, husband, dad, American, business owner, and author are just some of those titles that he holds. He was prior law enforcement, where he served as a deputy for 11 years, and he has worked patrol, and he worked as a robbery detective as well, which we get into and he talks about in this podcast. He owns a private security firm now called Intact Security in the state of Florida, and he has authored an Amazon bestseller called Mentally Tough in a Weak Society, and he's currently working on his second book that hopefully will be out any day now, and that is The Peaceful Savage. We get into what a peaceful savage is, and then we also talk about the Peaceful Savage Oath, which I'm going to have you listen to, and then I want you to go to his website and check that out at some point here, either before or after the podcast. So without taking any more time, let's get to this week's guest, Mitchell Tucker. Well, Mitchell, thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this opportunity. I think we got some great things that we can discuss that's going to be very beneficial to the listener.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you, I always begin with my little get to know you questions, and I've got to ask, coffee or tea, Mitchell?
Oh, coffee.
All right. There was enough hesitancy there that I almost have to think sometimes it's tea.
I love tea. I love it. But
really?
Yeah, I do love tea. But you know what? I only like it when it's ridiculously sweet. So I try to stay away from it.
A true Southerner.
Yeah, that's right. I went up north to visit family. I'm like, this isn't tea. What is this?
Exactly. Well, I'm from Northern Indiana myself. So yeah, it's a different environment when you order tea in the North.
That's right.
So do you have a favorite place to have that drink? Like that spot that you just relax and enjoy your morning and get ready for the day?
Well, we just bought our dream property in Central Florida on a lake, a beautiful lake. We're building a home, and there's nothing better than standing outside, watching the lake in the morning, drinking a cup of coffee. It's a beautiful view. I'm blessed.
Absolutely. Yeah, not a lake, but I've been very privileged to always live near water that at least didn't have houses on the other side. So even though it is a community, I still have the advantage of just looking at trees and enjoying the morning with the birds and the occasional gator, which is what we were talking about off camera, what the joys of Central Florida.
That's right.
Do you have a best or worst travel story?
It's funny you mentioned that because I just got back from Texas and we get on the plane. This probably isn't the worst, but it was, I've never had this happen, right? We get on the plane, they go to take off, like taxi the runway, and the jet on the right side of the plane wouldn't wake up according to the pilot. They couldn't get the jet to come on or turn over. So they had to stop the plane, and the mechanics came onto the plane. We sat there for about 35, 40 minutes. And then they got the jet working. And I'm like, man, that just does not seem 100%, 45 minutes ago, it wouldn't turn on. Now we're in the air. So, but
yeah, nothing to worry about here, guys. We're good to go. Just sit back and relax. Yeah, that would be a little nerve-wracking. I actually have a family member who's a pilot, and we would discuss these kind of things all the time. And it gives you a completely different perspective on what a lot of these things do that we as civilians or we as non-pilots, you're like, man, I am nervous as heck about this plane, but they don't seem that worried about it. So I guess we're good.
Yeah. To them, it's just driving a vehicle,
Exactly. I know you have a couple books, which we'll get to, but do you have a favorite or most meaningful nonfiction book that's really meant something to you?
Well, I would be doing an injustice if I didn't mention this one.
Yes. I agree with you 100%.
And there's nothing that the thing doesn't cover, right? It's not just all about, churchy stuff, right? But you've heard the thing, basic instructions before leaving Earth. I mean, that's what it is, right? So I suggest if you haven't got your hands on one of them, you should. But outside of that, I'm really into the personal development space. I enjoy the personal development space a lot because it's changed my life. Now, there's a lot of fluff out there and there's a lot of garbage and nonsense out there for sure in that space. And I'll be the first to admit that. But there's a lot of really good books out there, like As a Man Thinketh is a really good one. And changing that mindset, the mentality. I love books on mentality and mindset and mental resilience.
And that's great. And we're going to talk more about that as we get into your story, because that's such a powerful thing that you're involved in, but then it's so needed right now in the times that we're in.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's take that as an opportunity to kind of segue here a little bit. So let's just jump into your origin story. You can start as early as you want, but then kind of moving into, which was fairly early for you, becoming a deputy sheriff.
Yeah, so I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs, and but for whatever reason, I was not interested at all. I wanted to go in the military or law enforcement. That was it. And I was honestly leaning more towards the military. And as I was talking to recruiters, and that was the direction I was kind of wanting to go. But my dad was terminally ill my entire life. He was diagnosed with the disease and given 7 years to live when my mom was pregnant with me. And around the time I graduated high school, I went off to college for one semester, found out, not for me, came back home. And around that time, he started getting pretty bad. And I just couldn't wrap my mind around being overseas and something happening or not being able to get home to my family. I have a pretty tight-knit family, and I didn't want to do that. I went the law enforcement route. I'm happy I did. I loved it in law enforcement. I became a deputy sheriff at 19 years old. I got ragged pretty hard in the academy. I was 18 years old. Yeah. 18 years old in the police academy was not a fun time, but I was blessed to get involved in early. I can't believe someone hired me. I wouldn't have hired me at 19, but I'm glad they did. I couldn't even buy my own bullets, but I was carrying a gun around. And
isn't that crazy?
It is wild. It's wild. And fast forward a few years later, I became one of the youngest detectives in the agency. My last 2 years with Marion, I worked undercover narcotics and robberies. I was a robbery detective. So I did a lot of really cool things. I got to train with the Department of Homeland Security in Alabama, did a bunch of really fun stuff. I thoroughly enjoyed my career for sure.
Were you a TFO then? Was that where you were working with Homeland Security or?
That's when I was doing the robbery detective robbery stuff.
Okay.
They set me up there, but I was doing, I'm trying to think of the name of it. It was the people that the people when they have riots and stuff. Field Force is what it was called.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Different names everywhere.
Yeah. They sent us up there to do training with them to disperse crowds and all that kind of stuff. And then we did a couple active shooter drills and suicide bombing drills, all kinds of really cool stuff up there.
Very cool. So at some point, so how long were you in law enforcement?
About 12 years.
Okay.
Altogether. I did a couple of years reserves.
Okay. So at some point in all this, in your story, you then kind of segue into wanting to go into the business world. What kind of motivated you to want to go into the business world in the first place?
Now, this is a really cool story. So I get out from working the undercover stuff. I'm back in uniform. I'm in the Florida sun, sweating my butt off. And I was working in a very low crime, 65 and 55 and over type area. The county's huge. So I was down in that area. And I get a call. Lady calls and she says, my husband's going out of town. I'd like a deputy to come to my house to show me how I can make it more safe so I feel better while he's out of town. You're in law enforcement. I know a lot of law enforcement officers are listening. We show up with a smile on our face, but that's probably not the most exciting call you want to go on, right?
Right.
Especially after doing what I've done for the last 2 years. So I'm kind of annoyed. I'm not going to lie. And but I show up and yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, smile on my face. Hey, I would do this, I would do that, and show her some things on how to make her home more secure. But that lady changed my life forever. That one lady, because at the end of it, she said to me, she says, "Wow, the peace of mind you gave me was worth every bit of every bit of $500. And to think the sheriff's office does this for free." And the light bulb went ting. And I thought to myself, I was here like 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And she would be willing to pay me $500 if I didn't have this uniform on. And my mind was racing. I get back in the car and I'm just like, I can't believe that. That's insane. I wonder if there was more people like her who would be willing to pay that, right? Or if that was, that's not the norm. So what's interesting is the opportunities didn't show up at that point. This is something I like to point out. The opportunities were always there, but because of that light bulb that went on, I started to recognize the opportunities. I started to see them, right? So I ended up opening up a security company. And I was going to people's houses and doing exactly that. I was showing them how to make their house more secure. And then for an extra fee, I would come back and I would implement the things that I recommended.
Okay. Now, was it just to dig a little deeper, because you really piqued my curiosity on this, was it just from a alarm system kind of mindset, or was it like a CPTED kind of the crime prevention through environmental
crime prevention? Kind of? Yeah.
Okay.
So obviously, if you don't have an alarm system, I highly recommend that. But the putting really basic stuff, but a lot of the general public don't. I mean, to them, it's like, so putting a wooden dowel in the sliding glass door, right? Some really basic stuff that you mentioned. A lot of times, how many times have you responded to a call and you can't find the address?
Oh, yeah.
Right. You're looking around, even the 2 or 3 houses next to that house that you're going to don't have addresses. So a lot of these houses wouldn't have addresses. So you need to get an address. Yep. Very, very visible. I would also go online and I would search and make sure that they didn't have a serious digital footprint. Most of the time when people would hire me, I would do my digging. I was a detective for a while, so I would do my digging. And when I showed up to their house, I would say, "Is this your daughter? Is this where she goes to school? This is your neighbor. He's a sexual predator." I would have a packet that I would hand them and be like, "Look, I found all this online, and that's the last 4 of your social." And they would just be like, "Are you kidding me?" And I never used any law enforcement resources at all. This is basically Google and a couple paid things that the regular civilian can get their hands on.
Yeah.
And when I'd show up and show them that, it just blew their mind. So I would show them how to remove all that stuff off the internet, different services they can use, and then I show them how to make their house more secure. So
that's really cool.
Yeah.
So I read something, and I don't know, you can go further in but you actually developed some sort of alarm system or something, correct? Did you patent it, or did you?
I did.
Very cool. What did you develop?
So kind of going back to where I just left off there, it was rewarding. It was extra money in the pocket, but it wasn't enough to replace my income. I was going and doing free crime prevention presentations. I was piquing people's interest. And then if there was, I was talking to churches and their little groups and stuff and the Lions Club, 30, 40 people at a time. And I might get 1 or 2 people to have me come to their house and make a couple extra $100. So it wasn't enough to replace my law enforcement income. So I was looking for more. I met this gentleman and he developed this alarm system. And it was super basic. There wasn't a whole lot to it. It was a box, and without any wires, sensors, or gadgets, you could plug this box in. And if any door or window was violated, the alarm would trigger on the box. It wasn't monitored. It didn't have an app. It didn't have any smart home technology, literally just a box with a siren in it with this really cool technology. He had never patented it, though. The military created the technology initially, and the military used it in safe homes and their EOD department. So it was this technology that would hook to an explosive. And if someone violated a door or window and came into a safe home, It would send a signal to the bomb and detonate the bomb, destroy evidence, kill bad guy, whatever the case, however they used it. And it was actually top secret for the longest time. About 35 years ago, they declassified it and no one ever did anything with it. So this gentleman comes along, Joe is his name. He's an older gentleman. I think he's 82 now. He's became a really close friend of mine. He's a great guy. He took that technology, obviously took the bomb off, put it in a box, and instead of a bomb, he put a siren on it. So exact same concept. You plug this box in, someone breaks in the door or window, the alarm goes off. And I was introduced to him. I was like, man, that's such a cool concept, but it wasn't ready for the market. It didn't, you got to have an app. You got to be able to monitor it. There was no subscription based, nothing. It was just this box. So I started working with him and I was able to, I got it from him and we worked out a deal and basically I added an app. I got it professionally monitored. So it's monitored just like ADT or Simply Safe. I added smart home technology and got a key fob. So all the things that come with a regular alarm, added cameras, and we're able to patent it. We have a dozen claims on it. One patent, dozen claims.
Very cool. That's pretty cool. How long ago was this then? Was this decade ago or a couple of years ago, or like when did you segue out of law enforcement and into the business world and then into what you're doing now?
Well, that alarm system, before it became everything that it became, and it was just a box, I needed like $100,000. Okay, I'm a cop. Where am I going to find $100,000 to make all that happen?
Right.
So I start looking for an investor. I found an investor I really want to work with. I'm still in law enforcement at this time, and I'm calling him up. And he's no. He's not interested, right? But I don't stop. I keep driving him crazy. Well, finally he tells me, Mitchell, if you send this alarm to all my product testers and they give the thumbs up, I'll invest. Deal. I take all the screws out. I super glue them in because I didn't have a patent at the time. I didn't know him at the time. I was worried that they were going to, steal my idea.
Right.
So I super glue all the screws in. I send it out. Well, about 2 weeks later, they say, good to go. So I'm pumped. I'm like, all right, I got it. I got it in the bag finally, right? I've been working on this guy for a long time. And I call him up and I'm like, hey, the product testers, it was in an email and they emailed me, or him and CC'd me. And they're like, great product, not quite ready for the market, but with some capital, it could be ready. We think it's incredible, whatever. So I see this email and I call him and he says, Mitchell, you almost made me violate my number one rule. And I said, what's that? He said, I love you. I love the product, but I can't invest in you. I'm not tracking what's going on here. He said, my number one rule is never to invest in someone who doesn't have any skin in the game. He said, you've been a cop this entire time. If I give you the money and you don't do what you should do, I lose my money and you're still a cop. You lost nothing. So why would you work hard for this project? And I didn't even know what to say at the time because, I've got time invested and I've got a lot of interest, but outside of time and interest, what do I have invested? Nothing. And so I kind of had to say, yeah, you're right. I understand completely. So I go home, I'm laying in bed and I did not sleep hardly at all that night. I'm just laying there. And the next day we switched back and forth like every 3 months, which I hated. And I just switched back to day shift. So I had to be up at like 4:30 in the morning and I'm late. The alarm clock goes off. I tell my wife that, hey, I'm going to go turn in my 2 weeks. At first she was like, what? Right. That shock, that all on shock. She married a cop, and it's like, what am I going to do? And, but one thing that was cool, she was super supportive. And I encouraged the men out there, instill that in your wife that no matter what you'll provide, because if you're physically fit or, if you're physically in decent shape, mentally and physically, there is no reason why you shouldn't be able to provide for your family. And that's my personal opinion. If it makes people mad, if you are physically fit and mentally fit, you need to provide for your family. And she knows that there is nothing in this world that would hold me back from paying my mortgage and putting food on the table. No matter what I had to do, I would do it. Right. So because I've instilled that confidence in her, she said, go for it. That's what you want to do. So I go to work and I turn in my 2 week notice thinking I have 2 weeks. Well, I didn't know it's a sheriff's office policy. They let you go same day. And because obviously they don't want a guy with a gun that doesn't want to be there, I guess.
Right.
Makes sense. Now, they did pay me, but I'm thinking I have 2 weeks to kind of just slowly work out of law enforcement, tell everyone bye. I'm a cop at 19. I identified with that badge. That was my identity.
I'm sure.
And to have that, to turn in my 2-week notice and then say, all right, go to captain. And then within 30 minutes, I'm handing over my badge. That was rough. It was really rough. And so now I'm thinking, man, if this guy doesn't invest with me, I'm going to freak out, because he doesn't even know I quit, right? I'm quitting and hoping that he's going to invest. So I get back in my car and nothing but the pants on. They say, hey, you can bring those back. And I got pants on, undershirt, and I'm heading home. And I call him, and I'll never forget it. He answers the phone. He says, yes, Mitchell. Because at this point, he's done with me.
Yeah, exactly.
And I said, hey, I quit my job. And he said, you what? And I said, I quit my job. He's like, you freaking crazy, dude. Even if I do invest in you, it's going to take several years to get this up and making money. And I said, I know, but you said I had no skin in the game. I wanted to show you I had skin in the game, so I quit my job. And he's like, I won't say exactly what he said. He was a SOB. He said, well, if you can sell me, you can sell an alarm. And he invested the money. And that's how we were able to that's the story on how I got out of law enforcement and how I was able to take that box and turn it into an actual alarm system.
That is really cool. That is a powerful story. I don't know that that's for everybody, but it really does show something. And we're going to get to this as we go into more what you're doing now, but it does show mental toughness, if you would. It shows this, hey, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to be successful. And I'm going to show that to whomever I'm dealing with. Real quick, while we're kind of on this segueing out, because we're in a time, and we can get more into this as well, where lots of people are leaving this profession. But a lot of people aren't sure what to do. They don't feel like they have any marketable skills. Like, well, I've just been a cop. I started at 19. I started at 21, whatever it is for them, which is pretty common. A lot of the guys that I work with now that are captains and lieutenants, and they're all my age. So they're all in their early 40s, and they're getting ready to retire. So it's very common that they came into this career young, but a lot of times they don't feel like they have any marketable skills. Can you speak to that a little bit and kind of talk a little bit to that cop to business owner mindset?
Yeah. And, I completely relate with that, because there was a time in my life where I wanted out. And when I first came out from being a detective and working the narcotic stuff and went back to patrol, that first 3 months, I was miserable, because I don't know. I was done with everything. And I kept saying to myself, man, what am I going to do? Like, literally, I know nothing. I can shoot. I mean, I can drive a vehicle. But law enforcement is so much more than that.
Yeah.
Literally, a law enforcement officer wears so many hats. Of the most diverse people in our country, really, because you're a counselor, you're an incredible writer, right? I mean, how many reports do you write a day in a shift?
Right.
And so you're a presenter. How many times have you went in front of a courtroom and spoke in front? Oh, so you're a public speaker now, right? There's so many things that law enforcement does that can be transferred to the business world. What I did was I ended up opening up a security guard company. So I provide armed and unarmed security guard executive protection. So I went into the private sector, and who knows security better than a law enforcement officer? Right. So as a law enforcement officer, you're already used to speaking to people, right, and explaining things to them and breaking things down and being authoritative. So now I take that knowledge, open up a security company, and I handle all the sales, right? So when I talk to someone, I'm able to speak from a point of authority and say, look, I have 13 years of law enforcement experience. This is and people listen, because they know my experience. I can back up what I'm talking about, and I have a very authoritative presence, so they know I'm not full of nonsense, right? So all that kind of transitions into sales, and that ended up becoming my main bread and butter. Like, that's my main income, is the security guard services, the armed and unarmed security guard service. So we got about 45 officers that work for us, and we cover the entire state of Florida. But I encourage you to, any law enforcement officer out there, if you might not be able to see it because your blinders are on, and this might sound silly, but talk to your friends or talk to your loved ones, talk to your wife or husband and say, what is something that I'm good at that you think I'm good at? It's a silly question. It sounds stupid, but there is something that you could absolutely crush it at, but you don't see it. You think, oh, I'm just a cop. That's not the case.
Yeah. I don't think, I guess in some ways it may seem silly, which so many good ideas are, right? Because we're skeptics also. Right. But I don't think it is silly. I agree with you 100% because I think even I see that with myself where you don't realize like what you can bring to the table when it comes to these skill sets and stuff, or even things that you've refined over the years. And you may not be seeing it, but those around you, they're seeing it. And they are like, well, that makes sense. I always saw, like with me, people even becoming a law enforcement officer, because I did it later in life, people are like, well, I kind of always saw Wayne as a cop. It's like, I was a landscaper. How did you come up with that conclusion? You know what I mean? But they see these things with your personality. So no, I think that's great advice.
Yeah. And to show you how I transferred, I said that in law enforcement, you're a public speaker. If you've been to court, you've had to speak in front of people and you have to do it well, or, it's not going to go well for you. So I started doing public speaking. I absolutely love speaking. I speak as much as I can about mental resilience and mental fortitude. And I speak at the high schools. I speak at universities. I speak all over the place. Wrote a bunch of reports. I'm pretty good at writing. So I wrote a book, right? There's a lot of things that cops are really great at. They just got to learn how to kind of transition into the business world.
Yeah, no, I think that's powerful and a good reminder because I would say, you have a lot of conversations these days about mental health, a lot of conversations about resilience, but probably one of the number one conversations I have is people trying to look at what can I do either after I retire or something to do with transition in general. You brought up your book, which we definitely want to talk about. Let me start though with what kind of brought you to writing the book and how do you define mental toughness?
So like I said, my dad was diagnosed with the disease when my mom was pregnant with me. So they gave him 7 years to live. He just passed away 3 or 4 years ago. Wow. So I think 3 years ago. So he made it a long time. And the guy was the strongest man I've ever met in my entire life. He, not physically, but mentally, man, he went through it and was in pain 24/7. And he never missed a game. He always provided for our family. The guy was a beast, and he accomplished everything that he set his mind to. And I told him I was writing a book. And I remember towards the end there, he said, "Hey, did you finish that book? Did you finish that book?" And truth is, I said I was writing a book, but I was only in chapter 1, right? I was about halfway through chapter 1. And he kept asking me, "Did you finish that book?" Well, I never finished the book. Then my dad passes away, and I sat down and I wrote the book in like 3 days.
Yeah.
So it's funny how something like that will slap you in the face. And I thought to myself, man, it only took me 3 days. I could have done this before he passed, And the book I dedicated to him and my mom. He really was the fundamental thing behind the mental resilience that gave me that mental fortitude. And I didn't even realize he was giving it to me as a kid. There's so much that as parents we do. We don't even realize it's not even to us. It's not a teaching lesson, but our kids are looking at us and they're learning from everything that we do. Yeah. And he did that my entire life. He taught me the art of mental resilience.
What is something, so we use that word a lot. What does resilience, what does that look like to you? Because I've heard different descriptions and there's some illustrations that I use when I teach and so forth. But what does resilience look like to you? And can you apply that just kind of to the law enforcement profession as well? Because I think that it's something that we talk a lot about and people, their eyes gloss over. They're like, I have no idea what you're talking about right now. But being cops, we don't want to ask either. So can you go a little deeper into that?
Yeah. So mental resilience, both from a civilian perspective and a law enforcement perspective. Civilian perspective, COVID hit. Your wife is a massage therapist, my wife, right? Done. Income gone.
Right.
Me, the start of my entrepreneur journey, or not the start, but still pretty fresh. And my income is hardly nothing at all. Law enforcement agency calls, "Mitchell, are you interested in coming back?" The mental resilience it takes to say, look, I have a dream. And you can take the exit. Life is going to get hard no matter what you do. Anything that you do that's worthy of greatness is going to be difficult. We think of all the greats that's ever done anything impressive, right? They went against the grain. They did some really scary stuff. And I know deep down inside, they were scared. And there were so many exits, but they didn't take it because either they had a dream, a passion, a goal, something that they wanted. And because of that, they didn't take the easy route out. They didn't take the exit. And I believe that took a lot of mental resilience to make that happen. We can live, I like the term peaceful savage, and that's kind of like my passion. We could talk about that too. That's kind of the brand that we're building. And the second book I'm writing is called The Peaceful Savage. We can live as peaceful people all the time, but the second you get that call from the doctor and it's bad news, the second you get the call and you find out your spouse is cheating on you, the second you get the call and your boss lays you off, the second you get that call from the school and there's been an incident and your kid is in danger or hurt or harmed, you better be able to turn that savage on because life will crush you.
Yeah.
And if you're not able to flip that like a switch and dive deep and grab that resilience and mental fortitude, life is going to crush you. So I believe that if mental resilience, I mean, it's in every aspect of your life. If you don't have it, you better get it. As far as law enforcement perspective, it's funny. This story popped in my head, and I don't know if this is across the board with every agency, but I think it is. You're working your butt off, right? You want that undercover position, you want that detective position. You are clearly the best person for the job, and you work as hard as you possibly can, and then some other person gets the job, right? Yep. Because they're fishing buddies.
Everyone feels that frustration in this career.
Right. I was approached the first time I've tried out for the working detective narcotic stuff. It was very clear, and I'm not to pat myself on the back, but I was a very high producer. My cases were slam dunk. I didn't do no cheap crap. And the guy that got it above me was he went 10-8 and sat in his car and watched YouTube 90% of the shift. That was his law enforcement career. But the captain and him were like, deep sea fishing buddies. Yeah. And it was so awkward, and everyone knew it so much that the captain actually approached me and said, look, we know that, it might not have looked like it was the best option, but you're next, right? Well, anyways, there was a part of me that wanted to be like, you know what, screw that. I'm not even interested anymore. I'm done. All right. Yeah. But I really did want the position, the mental fortitude and resilience to keep, and that's a silly example, but I thought of it when you said from a law enforcement perspective, the mental resilience to say, you know what, even though I was passed up, I'm still going to show up every day. I'm going to produce, and I'm going to do my best to keep the streets safe, to keep everyone else safe, to put the bad guy away. Even though it didn't go the way I want, I'm still going to produce because it's the right thing to do.
I think that's a great example. I don't know how many times, because I'm fortunate to work in a supervisory role these days, and I don't know how many times I've heard this complaint from deputies when they come through the process, and they're like, and it's not always fishing buddies, right? Like sometimes there's something bigger that you don't know at any of the mid-level supervisory roles. Maybe it's way up here that they're like, this is what we're going to want to do. That's why we want so-and-so in that position. And there's all these pieces being moved all the time at these agencies that you may not be privy to. And I think what you're speaking to, at least my interpretation and what really resonates with me, is this whole idea of mindset, that staying positive, because they're like, well, like you said, well, I don't even want to go in there and try out anymore. But it's like, yeah, but who you become through that process is going to be the person that's going to be successful, and maybe not in that particular position. And in my situation, there were several that I didn't get, but then the ones that I have gotten happened to be I'm thankful I got those and didn't get the other ones. It's like my life would have been completely different had I done those others, and not in a good way. So I think that's powerful. So one of the things that I love about what you're doing, Mitchell, and looking at your website, and we absolutely are going to get to Peaceful Savage. I'm kind of building towards that, but I really love what you're doing in the oath and so forth, and we'll get to that here in a minute. But before we do, one of the things I love is I really feel like you've got a strong foundation. I think you are building it out correctly. So you build it out, you talk about mental health, and one of the statements that you make on your website is being pro-America and pro-God shouldn't be controversial. And I think that personally, and anyone that listens to the podcast and listens specifically to the morning roll calls knows that this is something I talk a lot about, that is kind of the foundational principles as an American, blessed to live in the greatest country on earth, but to understand the history and what it means to be an American. And anyway, I could go on my soapbox, but I would rather turn this over to you and hear a little bit more about what that means to you being pro-America and pro-God.
Absolutely. We live in a society that is increasingly, we talk about mental resilience and mental toughness. It's increasingly getting weaker and weaker. And it's ironic. These people are hating on God, America. They're burning the flag. But if they were to do it in any other country, and not any, but a majority of the countries, they'd never see the light of day again.
Yeah.
You know, I want more than anything, someone asked me what the definition of success was. More than anything, I want to leave an impact so that my kids still grow up in a free country. And so that my kids, when I'm laying on my deathbed, I can say that I left my mark in a positive way. I made a difference. And what I talk about is controversial, and it shouldn't be, but it is. And it doesn't always feel good, but I like to use the example, like Martin Luther King. When he got up, I'm sure his heart was probably beating 110 miles an hour. He was shaking like crazy. He had a lot of courage, but I guarantee you, if he was here, he would tell us, yeah, I was scared as hell. Right?
Yeah.
But that's the problem. Everybody shuts down when they're a little scared. When there's any kind of adversity or any pushback or anything at all, people shut down. I personally fall into a category that's often referred to as the silent majority, right? Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but I fall into that category. At least that's how I've been labeled,
Yeah. I'm just wondering how much of a majority they are anymore, but I'm with you. I absolutely would be in there as well.
So, it is my opinion that that's why we're in the freaking crap that we're in.
Yeah. The silent part.
Because we've been too quiet. Yeah. Everyone sits quiet. And someone asked me my opinion. Oh, you're going to get it. You're going to know exactly. And you probably don't even have to ask me my opinion. If you look at any of my content for any stretch of time, you're going to see exactly what I believe. But you can't say that about a lot of content creators. You can click, you can read, you can read their books, you can watch their videos. You still don't know what they believe, because everyone wants to stay right there in the middle so that everyone loves them, so that there's no pushback. Well, I'm okay with being hated if it's the right thing to do. That's it.
I love that. And I think that you make an important point there, because it's not about being controversial just for the sake of being controversial. It's about being grounded in principle. And if those principles become controversial, then it is what it is. Am I putting words in your mouth, or is that kind of how you feel?
No, that's it. So what makes a man great? In my opinion, being able to lay your head on the pillow at night and know that at no point did you violate any standard that you set for yourself, any values that you have for yourself. If you can lay your head on the pillow and say, oh, well, I shouldn't have done that, but the money was great. In my opinion, you're not a great man, right? You're weak. So a strong-minded man, a great man is someone, or woman, is someone who can lay their head on the pillow every single night and say, man, that was a hard decision, but I didn't violate anything that I believe in.
Yeah, I think that's powerful. And that is life-changing in and of itself. And maybe that leads into, but one of the questions that you've mentioned, and I'd be curious on your answer on it, is like, what is the one thing you believe could change the world? Where are you coming from in that mindset?
Yeah. And really that's it, is speaking out, because I do feel it's hard to feel like we are the majority. And when I say majority, I say the pro-God, pro-America, pro-gun, pro-freedom, freedom of speech, the people who just love being free and realize it came from God, right? Those people, I believe that we are the majority. It doesn't feel like that because we're not the ones run our mouths loud as hell all the time, right? The people with the obscure beliefs who think they're identifying as crabs and peacocks and stuff, those people are loud as hell, right? So to us, it's like, dang, man, the freaking, we're the minority. It's what it feels like, but it's not true. And I believe what changes the world is the people like you and I and probably a good chunk of the listeners step up and say, hey, look, this is what I believe. I'm not scared to share it.
Yeah.
And let other people know, hey, you're not alone. If we let other people know they're not alone, then it will embolden other people to do the same thing.
Yep. No, I couldn't have said it better myself. I mean, and I've always championed that whole speaking the truth in love. I mean, that's what it comes down to. I don't say things just so, I mean, we're all human. Sometimes I say things get a rise out of people, but that isn't always my intention. It's always this idea of speaking the truth in love and just coming back to being grounded and know why you believe what you believe. Sadly, we have an entire generation, couple generations now, depending on where you do the lying at, that weren't taught the things I was taught in school, don't have those historical understanding of, the history and what makes America great and American exceptionalism. And some people are like, well, what does that have to do with law enforcement? Well, I would argue it has everything to do with law enforcement because politics and those kind of things not only fundamentally transform how law enforcement does its job, it transforms society, which is going to impact how law enforcement does its job. So I think you're hitting the nail on the head, and these are probably some of the most important conversations that we can have. At what point, then, you created something called the Peaceful Savage, and you have an oath that's tied to that. Can you kind of take us into the creation of Peaceful Savage and what that's all about?
Yeah, crazy story. I think it's really unique. I'm laying in bed, 3:00 in the morning, and I wake up with the word Peaceful Savage on my brain. I swear to you. Weirdest thing. So I grab my phone and I put in the notes, Peaceful Savage, because I didn't want to forget about it. And I go back to sleep. A couple hours later, I wake up for the day, and it's the first thing on my brain. I didn't have to add it to the notes, apparently. And it never left. It was on my brain for like 2 weeks, just constantly. So I'm here at the office. And I'm like, I'm going to dive into this. I look up the definition of peaceful. I mean, we both assume we know the definition of peaceful and the definition of savage, but I'm like, why do I keep having these two words in my head? So I look up the definition of peaceful. I look up the definition of savage. They're not going together. That doesn't make any sense. So it's a long story as a segue into a Bible verse I ran across, but you might have heard the verse, the meek shall inherit the earth. Well, I hear that Bible verse, and I've known that Bible verse, but I kind of put it together, the Peaceful Savage. I said, in my Neanderthal thinking mind, how does that work? If a meek person tries to take my wallet, right? I'm thinking I don't know, blunt force. If a meek person tries to take my wallet, it's not going to happen.
Right.
Doesn't make any sense to me. So I talked to my pastor, I dig a little deeper, and then I find out really something pretty cool. The Bible's full of really cool stuff. And what it's referring to is the meek person. If you can imagine someone who is trained with their sword to cut down anything in its path. I mean, an epic warrior. This guy is trained from head to toe. He is a beast. But due to his meekness, he leaves his sword sheathed. He doesn't pull it out. He has the ability to cut down, but due to his meekness, he leaves it sheathed. Law enforcement officers are the same way. You have a firearm on your side, taser, spray, baton, ton of ammo. You have the ability to cut down. But because of who you are, you leave it sheathed until necessary. When evil pokes its head, you take care of business.
Yep.
You have that ability to be savage. You have that ability, but you decide to keep it sheathed unless necessary. Same as the meek person who inherits the earth. And I thought, wow, that is so similar to the peaceful savage, right? You have someone who has all the abilities, very, very capable physically, mentally, spiritually, but due to them being peaceful, due to them being the good guy, they keep that contained. But when necessary, they have the ability to let that out. And I don't just mean physically, right? Because when you start a business and you're worried about where's payroll coming from, you better be able to tap in the savage.
Yeah.
But when you go home with your children and they're like wanting to play with daddy and hang all over daddy, you better be able to tap into the peaceful aspect of it. You have to be able to switch that on and off and go into both modes. And I think the combination of the peaceful savage is the ultimate man or woman.
Yeah. No, I think that's powerful. And so then what kind of led you to wanting to do the oath and trying to really draw people into this? And I believe it's peacefulsavageoath.com. I'm doing this one from memory. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's psoath.com.
psoath.com. So I'll be sure to link that up in the show notes. But what kind of led you into wanting to do the oath and getting people to be willing to say, yes, I'm in, and this is something that I resonate with?
Well, going back to what I believe will change the world. I believe that if people are vocal, people share what they believe, and people commit to always doing what's right, that's what's going to change the world. If we could get majority of the people to sign this oath and truly, genuinely mean it, not just, I want to see what's on the other side of this webpage, so let me type in my name.
Right.
If people will genuinely sign this oath, read it with intentionality and sign it and live by it, we change the world. Yeah. Now, do I think that's going to happen? I don't know, but I'm going to try. Right. I'm still young enough. I got quite a few years behind I can try. Yeah. And the thing about the oath, we talked about some of the things I say are controversial, but they shouldn't be. The oath, I really intentionally wrote it to where it could not be controversial. There's nothing in there about being controversial. Part of the oath says that I commit to always doing what's right. I don't care how you believe. That's right to you, not right to me. So if you believe that something is right, you're committing to always doing that. But the reason I wrote it like that is because I do believe the majority believes the way that they should believe. Right. So if the majority signs that oath and they practice it the way they should, then we'll be in good hands.
I love it. I think that's powerful. So your first book, Mentally Tough in a Weak Society, that is available on Amazon. And it looks like you also have the Peaceful Savage Journal. Is that available right now as well?
Yeah, you can get the Peaceful Savage Journal. The book, Mentally Tough in a Weak Society, it went number 1 on Amazon. That's the one I wrote right when my father passed away. It's only about 109 pages, and it doesn't talk about me personally, my story very much. It's more or less just the basics of mental resilience, how to obtain it, what it means. And the second book is The Peaceful Savage. It should be out around December, so about a month or so. And it dives a little bit deeper into my personal story, and then what it means to be a peaceful savage, the different elements of a peaceful savage.
I love it. Well, I'll be sure to link that up, and I'll be keeping an eye out for your book to come out in December so I can link that up as well. So what's next for you and your mission? Where are you going from here, Mitchell?
Well, I still have my security company, Intact Security. We're blessed, and it's growing. We're really starting to grow pretty quickly right now. So continue to grow that. And I want to just spread the message of the peaceful savage as much as possible. Any opportunity I can to speak and to share that message, that's my intention.
I think that's a great mission. Let me ask you my final question that I ask everybody who comes on the show. And we've talked about so many things that probably fit this, but really what I like to do here is just drill down to one final point. So what is the one takeaway, the one thing that law enforcement officers can do that's going to make a difference in their personal lives?
And not just law enforcement, but everyone. But yes, certainly law enforcement. I have a passion for you guys, for keeping you all safe and showing you a better way, is to live with intentionality. Wake up every single day and live with intentionality. And that's not easy. It's really not. It is so easy to set your alarm. It goes off. You wake up, grab something to eat, grab a cup of coffee, do your shift, come home, say hi, eat dinner, go to bed, set your alarm. And most people live like that, completely robotic. And they live their life like that and look forward to the 2 weeks a year that they take, or 1 week a year that they take for vacation.
Yeah.
Just complete robots. And then they're like, oh, I can't wait to retire. I can't wait to retire. Then you turn 55, 60, whatever, you retire, you're bored, you go back to work, you work a little bit until you get sick, you retire, then you die.
Yeah. Many times within 5 years of retirement, sadly, from statistics, right, especially for law enforcement officers. I think that's great advice. Thank you, Mitchell. I really appreciate you coming on today. What's the best way for people to contact you?
You can mitchellrtucker.com or any social media platform, Mitchell R. Tucker. And then I encourage you to check out the oath. If you're interested in learning more about the book or getting the book when it comes out, if you do sign the oath, psoath.com, we'll email you when the book comes out.
Very good. Well, I will be sure to have all that linked up so the listeners can get their hands on it. Mitchell, I really appreciate you taking time. I love what you're doing. I love what you're all about, and I love what you're standing for. So thank you very much.
I appreciate it, sir. Thank you.
So how was that? I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching or listening to this week's podcast. Every episode has the full show notes, which goes a little bit deeper into who the guest is, has links to everything we discussed, and has a transcription of everything that was stated. So if you're looking for something that was said, you can easily search that. And that is all available in the show notes page at ontheblueline.com, or the easy way, because that's what I like to do. I like to make it easy for you. You can just look down on whatever, whether you're watching this on YouTube or you're listening to it on Spotify or anything else. If you just go down to the show notes, the very first link is to the show notes page. That is all for today. But do not forget that I'm going to see you next Monday at Roll Call, and I will see you Thursday in the interview room. But in the meantime, as always, I'll see you on the Blue Line.